The Life of St. Jerome by Father Largent, Chapter 7, Controversy with St. Augustine. The controversy which a passage of St. Paul's epistle to the Galatians, differently interpreted by Jerome and Augustine, excited between the aged expounder of the Scriptures, who compared himself to Entellus in the Aeneid, and the priest who had already become famous and who later shed such unapparelled glory upon the hitherto obscure see of Hippo, took place between the years 395 and 405. A few historical details may help to explain the object of the controversy. The gospel had first been proclaimed to the Jews, just as the Messiah had first been promised to them. Through severe monotheism, the traditions and hopes which they held in trust, everything in the designs of God had prepared them to receive the new revelation, for according to St. Paul, the law of Moses was to be their guide to the gospel. We know what resistance the unintelligent and intractable pride of many of the Jews opposed to the divine gift, and even among those who accepted Christianity, there were many who, failing to understand its supremely new and liberating character, imposed the observance of the Mosaic rites upon the Gentiles as a necessary condition of their salvation. The question had been decided at the Council of Jerusalem, where under the divine guidance, Peter, the leader of the 12, and James, the bishop of what was termed the Christians of the circumcision, had agreed to emancipate the converted pagans from the prescriptions of the law. All the Jewish Christians, however, did not allow themselves to be convinced. In the eyes of these staunch upholders of rights, henceforward rendered unless the only true Christians were those who conformed themselves to all the Mosaic observances, and who became in the church what the proselytes of the temple had been in the synagogue. The others were the proselytes of the gate, with whom all the relations of life, all familiar intercourse were forbidden. At one moment, Peter had seemed to favor these unjustifiable claims. In the following fluent and dramatic language, St. Paul has given us an account of what has been called the conflict of Antioch. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face because he was to be blamed. For before certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles, but when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews disassembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, If thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of the Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? Let it first be clearly understood that in whatever manner the passage which so agitated St. Jerome and St. Augustine may be interpreted, the doctrine of the infallibility of St. Peter and the Apostles, infallibility which, personal to these, has been perpetuated in the successors of St. Peter, was not in question. The Apostles' contention touched only upon a question of conduct. Was this contention, however, real, or was it not rather preconcreted scene between Paul and Peter, who were both anxious to repress, by some startling example, the intolerable pretensions of the Judaizers? This was Jerome's opinion. Paul, he wrote, seeing the grace of the gospel thus imperiled, as an experienced warrior had recourse to a new maneuver. He wished to oppose another line of action to that by which Peter hoped to save the Jews and to withstand the apostle of circumcision to his face. He did not really blame Peter's intention, and if he reproved him and publicly resisted him, it was in the interest of the Christians of Gentile extraction. Should it be maintained that Paul really resisted Peter and that to uphold the truth of the gospel, he made his senior the object of a bold and public affront, it should no longer be said that Paul became a Jew in order to convert the Jews, and one would have to believe him guilty of deception when he shaved his hair in Centuria, and made his offering at Jerusalem with a shorn head, when he circumcised Timothy, and when he walked barefoot, all of which were clearly a part of the Jewish ceremonies. If Paul, who had been sent to the Gentiles, believed he had a right to say, give no offense, either to the Jews or to the Church of God, If, fearing to scandalize the Jews, he did certain things which are contrary to the liberty of the gospel, by what right or on what ground dared he reprove Peter, the apostle of the Gentiles, for what he himself might be accused of having done? But, as we have already said, Paul publicly opposed Peter, and the others, that is, the Judaizing party, so that the stratagem, which, to the disadvantage of the Christians of Gentile extraction, imposed legal observances, might be corrected by a feigned rebuke. In support of this theory, Jerome alleged the authority of Origen, Didymus, Apollinarius, who was still a Catholic, Eusebius of Esma, Theodorus of Heraclea, and later that of John Chrysostom, whom the plots and violent measures of his friend Theophilus had lately caused to be deposed and banished. Augustine took exception to an interpretation which seemed to him to weaken the testimony of St. Paul and the veracity of the Scriptures, and in a letter which the African priest Porphyrius was entrusted to deliver to Jerome, he expressed himself upon the subject with half-sorrowed severity. Didit literas familias ilias quidem salibus tanem asserioris correctionis Asperias, said Bernius. I have read, Augustine wrote Jerome, a commentary upon the epistles of St. Paul, which is ascribed to you, and I came across a passage in the epistle to the Galatians, where the apostle Peter is reproved for the deception into which he has been drawn. I confess with no small sorrow that in it you, even you, or the author of this writing, whatsoever he may be, have defended the cause of untruth. I consider a fatal error to believe it possible to find anything in the Scriptures which is untrue. In other words, to believe that the men to whom we are indebted for the sacred works could have inserted therein any falsehood. Once admit any officious untruth in the holy books, then, in accordance to this pernicious principle, in order to escape from a moral which imposes too much restraint upon us, or from dogmas which are beyond our comprehension, we may attribute any part of those works to the affrays of an author who has not told the truth. Having pursued his urgent argument, pointed by illustrations from the Bible, Augustine, scarcely hoping that his request would be needed to, demanding an explanation which would dispel his doubts. In conclusion, he claimed a fraternally severe criticism, of which he had just given an example for those of his works which Porphyrius was to offer to Jerome. Meanwhile, Porphyrius, who had been made bishop of Citra in Numidia, instead of starting for Palestine, took possession of his see, where he very shortly died. The letter, therefore, which had been given to him never reached its destination, but unfortunately fell into indiscreet hands, and the copies of it which were circulated in Dalmatia and Italy encouraged Jerome's enemies in their criticisms. Augustine had also been raised to the episcopacy in 395, and amid new cares and duties had no doubt forgotten not only his letter, but the commentary which had provoked it, when a note which the deacon Presadius brought him from Jerome recalled them to his mind. As Jerome's missive did not in any way answer the questions Augustine had put to him, the latter, thinking that his letter had gone astray, wrote another which was longer, but not less peremptory and no less aggressive. After having again tried to demonstrate the dangers of the Hieronomium explanation, Augustine exhorted the aged historian to a courageous retraction of it, reminding him of the fable of Stesichorus, who, struck with blindness by the demigods, Castor and Pollux, for having decried the chastity and beauty of Helen in the satire, did not recover his sight until he had sung the praises of the grace and virtue he had outraged upon his lyre. I implore you, he wrote Jerome, gird yourself with a sincere and Christian severity, correct and amend your work, and so to speak, sing its recantation. The truth of Christians is incomparably more beautiful than the Helen of the Greeks, for it indeed have our martyrs fought more bravely against the Sodoma of their century than did the Greek heroes against Troy. I do not urge you to this disavowal, so that you may recover your mental sight, for God forbid that I should think that you had lost it. Yet suffer me to tell you that through I know not what inadvertency you have turned aside your eyes, sound and far-sighted though they may be, and have failed to see the disastrous consequences of a system which would admit that one of the authors of our sacred books could once, in some part of his work, have been conscientiously and piously lied. The man by name Paul, to whom this letter had been confided, overcome by his terror of the sea, did not embark for Palestine, and another messenger, chosen by Augustine, also failed to deliver the missive to Jerome. The letter, however, spread abroad, and with it a report that Augustine had composed and sent to Rome a book against Jerome. The deacon Cincius, a friend of the hermit, found Augustine's letter, together with some other writing by the same doctor, on an island in the Adriatic, and lost no time in sending it to its destination. This certainly was enough to rouse a soul less ardent and a writer less harassed by envy or less surrounded by admirers, quick to take alarm and even to be angered at all criticisms directed against their master. Yet Jerome controlled himself and refrained from answering. He explained to the Bishop of Hippo, it seems that although he unmistakably recognized Augustine's familiar style and manner of the argument, the material evidences of authenticity were wanting. Besides which, the veteran soldier of orthodoxy shrank from opening hostilities with a bishop of his own communion, whom he had loved before even knowing him, and who had sought him in friendship, one who already illustrious was to continue his scriptural works, and one in whom he gladly welcomed a legitimate heir. When at last Augustine heard of the pain his letters divulged in such an unaccountable manner had caused in the solitude of Bethlehem, he wrote to Jerome, a rumor has reached me which I have difficulty in believing, yet why should I not mention it to you? It has been reported to me that some brothers I know, not which have given you to understand that I have written a book against you, and that I have sent it to Rome. Rest assured that this is false. God is witness to that, and I have written no book against you. The book in question was a letter, or letters of which Jerome's enemies had taken a perfidious advantage. If there be anything in my works contrary to your views, know or believe that it was written not to antagonize you, but to explain what seemed to me the truth. Point out to me anything in my writings which could offend you. I will receive your counsels as from one brother to another, glad to make any corrections, glad also of such a token of your affection. I ask and entreat this of you. Then followed one of those effusions in which Augustine's soul so often found its outlet. Oh, why, if I may not live with you, may I not at least live in your vicinity and hold sweet and frequent intercourse with you? But since that has not been granted to me, consent at least to uphold and draw closer to the ties which render us present to one another in the Lord. Disdain not the letters which I will sometimes write you. Sincere and touching as were the tones of this letter, it failed to disarm Jerome, who did not think it sufficiently explicit. Moreover, the advice and even the appeals which it contained offended that somewhat proud susceptibility of the aged biblical student. After evincing his doubts, with which we have already mentioned upon the authenticity of Augustine's letter, he proceeded to add these words, God forbid that I should dare to censure the works of your beatitude. Let it suffice me to defend my own without criticizing those of others. Your wisdom knows full well that every man is wedded to his own opinion, and that it were childish, boasting to imitate the youths of old, who by slandering famous men sought to become famous themselves. Neither am I foolish enough to be offended by the divergences which exist between your explanation and mine. You yourself are not hurt at my holding different opinions, but where our friends have really the right to reprove us is when, not perceiving our own wallet, as Sirius says, we look at that of another. I have still one thing to ask of you, which is that you should love one who loves you, and that being young, you challenge not an aged man upon the battlefield of the Scriptures. We too have had our day, and we have run our race to the best of our abilities, and now that it has come to be your turn to do likewise, and that you are making great strides, we have a right to rest. To follow your example in quoting the poets, remember dares and Entellus. Think also of the proverb which says, as the ox grows weary, he plants his foot more firmly. I dictate these lines with sadness. Would to God I might embrace you, and that in brotherly intercourse we might have instructed one another. Think of me, saintly and venerable Pontiff. See how much I love you. I, who although challenged, have been unwilling to reply, and who do not yet resign myself to ascribe to you what in another I should blame. To this letter, which was brought him by the subdeacon Asterius, Augustine made a modest and touching answer. He vindicated himself of having, so to speak, defled the aged athlete upon the field of the Scriptures, and merely asked to be enlightened. Far be it from me that I should take offense, if by sound reasons you will and can prove to me that you understand the Epistle to the Galatians, or any other like part of the Scriptures, better than I. Far from resenting it, I should deem it a privilege to be instructed or corrected by you. But, beloved brother, you would not think that your answer could have hurt me, had you not thought that I had been the first to wound you. My best course is to acknowledge my fault, and to confess that I offended you, in writing that letter which I cannot disown. If I offended you, I conjure you by the meekness of Jesus Christ, do not render me evil for evil by offending me in your turn. Now, to dissimulate what you find to alter or correct in my writings, or my discourses, would be to offend me. Reprove me with charity if you deem me in the wrong, innocent though I may be, or treat me with the tenderness of a father if you think me worthy of your affection. Innocent, I will receive your reproaches in a spirit of gratitude. Guilty, I will acknowledge both your beloved's and my own error. Jerome's allusion to the hardy Entellus furnished Augustine with the opportunity for the following humble confession. What? Shall I fear your letters, which are severe perhaps, but solitary like the gauntlets of Entellus? The aged athlete dealt dares, formidable bows, and felled him to the ground without curing him. But I shall receive your corrections with a quiet heart, for I shall not suffer through them, but be healed. You wish me to compare you to an ox, I consent, but to an ox who under the weight of years retains all his vigor, and in the divine acre pursues his fruitful toils. I prostrate myself before you. If I have done any wrong, trample upon me. The weight which has accrued to you with age is not too heavy, so long as my sin be crushed under your foot like a brush of straw. Augustine then complained of the great distance which separated Hippo from Bethlehem, and of the endless delays to which their correspondence was subjected. How he would have liked to see and listen to the aged master. I discovered so much in those of your letters which have reached me, that my most earnest wish is to live at your side. I am thinking of sending one of my sons to your school, should you deign to answer me, for I have not, and never shall have, your scriptural knowledge. What little I have, I distribute among God's people, and my episcopal duties make it impossible for me to devote more time to such a study than is strictly necessary for the instruction of my people. Won by the humble and persuasive tones of this letter, Jerome answered it, and at last began the purely amicable controversy for which Augustine had asked. It has been said, however, that before entering the lists, he wished once for all to unburden his heart, so that he leavens of the past should in the future no longer embitter their friendship or his own judgment. He gratified this desire in a letter of an entirely personal character, which acts as a sort of prologue to the second one, which he wrote. Jerome's explanations were at times frank to the point of harshness. An undercut of resentment runs through them, yet his anger was not unmixed with love. He wrote, several of our brothers, pure vessels of Christ, such as may be found in great numbers in Jerusalem and the holy places, have suggested to me that the thought that you did not act uprightly, but that enamored of the vain clamoring glories of this world, you sought to increase your reputation at the expense of ours, persuading the majority that when you challenge, I tremble, and that you write as a scholar, but I keep silence like an ignorant man, and that I have at last met someone who has known how to silence my loquacity. I frankly confess to your beatitude that it was primarily for this reason I would not answer you. Besides which, I could not bring myself to believe that the letter was really from you, not deeming you capable of attacking me with, as in the proverb, a sword immersed in honey. Moreover, I fear that I should be accused of arrogance towards a bishop, should I censor my censor, especially had I drawn attention to the passages in his letters which breathed of heresy. Finally, I should have given you good cause to complain of an inconsiderate answer, and to say to me, did you verify my letter and recognize my signature before permitting yourself to thus outrage a friend, and to brand him with the shame of the malice of others? Also, as I have already written you, either send me the same writing signed by your hand, or else cease from challenging an aged man who is hidden in the depths of his cell. If you wish to display and show your learning, then seek out some of the noble and eloquent youths that I am told abound in Rome, who are able to combat you, and who would dare cross swords with a bishop. I, who was once a soldier and armed-to-day veteran, will sing your victories and the victories of others, but I cannot face a battle with the body which is exhausted by age. Still, should you persist in asking me for an answer, remember that the masterly inactivity of the aged Fabius Maximus defeated the youth onslaughts of Hannibal. Jerome continued his recriminations and complaints, and concluded his letter with a paragraph in which are summed up the various sentiments which had inspired it. Very well, beloved my son, by reason of your age, my father, by reason of your rank, I ask one thing of you. When you wish to write to me, pray do in such sort that I may be the first to receive your letters. Thanks for joining me for this Chapter 7, Part 1 of St. Jerome's book. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. God bless.